If you got a Bible, meet me in Mark chapter 7 this morning. Mark chapter 7 is where we're going to be today. If you got a Bible, you can open up or power up, however you find that. Mark 7. We're continuing to look through the Gospel of Mark, and in particular, a section of Mark where we're kind of following some of the people that when you and I hear their names, we think of them as the kind of people that knew Jesus the best. People like St. Peter and St. John and St. James. And yet, as we're following their story, we're realizing they didn't always feel that way. Some of those guys, and especially the early followers of Jesus, they rejected him at the very beginning. They wanted nothing to do with Jesus at all. Some of them literally grew up with Jesus. And yet, as we've followed their journey up to this point, they've watched him calm storms and feed hungry crowds and push back darkness and supernaturally heal people from disease. But despite being so familiar with him, they've continued to miss who he is and the life that he's come to offer and invite them into. And honestly, that's pretty encouraging, I think, for a lot of us, at least for people like me, for whom transformation always seems to take a lot longer than I thought that it would. And this morning, we're going to continue the story, but Mark shifts the camera just a little bit. What we're going to see today, it's not just the early followers, the disciples, who are misunderstanding Jesus. This morning, Jesus is going to encounter a group of people that the whole world would have assumed were the types of people that had it all figured out, but who turned out to have the exact same problem as the disciples. And I'm guessing a whole bunch of us. Before we get to them, I want to start with a really simple question that I assumed you've asked about you, maybe even this morning, perhaps at least this week at one point or another. So here's the question. You ready for it? The question is this: what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? If you ask that question, maybe recently, maybe at a broad surface level, you spend the whole morning looking for your keys, you upset the whole morning routine, everything's thrown off, and you look all over the house, turn everything upside down, only to realize that the keys you were looking for were in your pocket the whole time. And you ask the question, what is wrong with me? Or maybe you forget an appointment that you see on the calendar. You'd spent the whole day planning for, preparing for, and yet at some point of the day, you just get busy, completely forget, roll the whole thing, and the question comes out. What is wrong with me? Have you wondered that? But maybe at a deeper level than that. You've got a habit, maybe even addiction. You've been trying to break it. You've got a streak rolling. Things are going really, really well for you. And then you find yourself in a weak moment. You're right back in it again. What's wrong with me? Words come shooting out of your mouth that make a direct hit in the heart of your wife or your husband or your kids or your best friend, that if you're honest, you totally intended to land that way. But as soon as they come out of your mouth and detonate on the heart of somebody that you love the most, you wish you had the words back and you can't get them back. But all you're left with is the question, what's wrong with me? Maybe you just find yourself taking stock of a bunch of the little tiny decisions you've made all the way along in your life, the direction that your life is aimed or the destination that those different decisions have taken you. You're nowhere near where you ever wanted to be or hope to be, relationally or physically, emotionally, spiritually. And eventually you realize you're the common denominator in all of those areas. And you think, I've got nobody to blame but me. But this isn't the me I've been trying to be. And the question comes up in your mind, what is wrong with me? Have you asked it? If you haven't asked that question, or if it's hard to relate to at all, I'd love to meet you. Or maybe not. But here's a question, if that one doesn't resonate with you, that I know with 100% certainty you have asked at one point or another, especially from that vantage point. If you never ask, what's wrong with me? I know you've asked the question, what is wrong with them? Like you see that explosion of anger from somebody else, or watch somebody else sabotage another relationship, or lie when they didn't need to lie at all. Or keep making the same destructive decision over and over and over, and you think, how can they not see this? What is wrong with them? I mean, some of you are going to ask that question 2 or 3 times in the parking lot on the way out of here in a couple of minutes. What is wrong with them? You don't have to walk with Jesus. You don't have to recognize who he is or have anything to do with Jesus, for that matter, for either of those 2 questions to come up in your mind. We are all always asking them. And the truth is, they're really good questions. because they aim to diagnose a problem that every single one of us feel within us and everywhere around us. And it's important because the way you diagnose a problem has everything to do with what you try to do about it. One of the most dangerous things in the world is a bad diagnosis. Because if the diagnosis is wrong, you can spend years of your life treating symptoms of the wrong thing and actually making the real problem worse. In fact, for centuries, sailors crossing oceans would find themselves slowly falling apart. Their gums would start to ache and bleed. Their teeth would fall out. There were all kinds of sores that would break out on their body, and old wounds that they thought had healed over would reopen and fester. Their bodies would get weak. Some of them even wouldn't survive it. And doctors tried all kinds of things to solve the problem. They tried things like bloodletting and homemade tonics that turned out to actually poison the sailors they were trying to treat. They tried surgeries and remedies and superstitions that caused those sick sailors to feel even worse, while they and everybody else tried to figure out and fix what was wrong with them. And it turned out the problem was shockingly simple. They were starved for something essential. They had what's called scurvy. Their treatment wasn't surgery, wasn't superstition, it was simple vitamin C. Their bodies were missing an essential ingredient to survival that they'd left behind on the journey. Imagine how frustrating that would be. Like all those treatments, all that pain, and the real problem still untouched, while the solution was right there in front of them the whole time. Look at Mark chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. The Pharisees, some teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem, gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they don't eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and kettles. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" So I know all of us don't have the same kind of background in the Bible, but if you spent much time reading through the Bible or around people who read the Bible, you sort of know it's implied when you get to the Pharisees, you're supposed to sort of silently boo in your seat. Like the Pharisees are pretty easily recognizable as the bad guys in the story of Jesus. They're the super villains in the story. Jesus doesn't rebuke anybody else in the world or in the culture around him as strongly as he does these Pharisees. And ultimately, the Pharisees are going to be the ones that insist on having Jesus crucified. But before we go very far in the passage today, I need you to suspend all of that knowledge that you have about the Pharisees for just a few minutes and pretend that you're coming into the story fresh for the very first time. Because we need to see these guys the way that the people around Jesus would have seen these guys. The Pharisees were the kind of people that good religious people in Jesus' day wanted to be like. They were the kind of people that you wanted your daughters to marry. If you thought of good and godly together, these were the people that you looked to. These were the people that you looked up to. These were not the bad guys. In everybody's minds, these were the best guys. They'd memorized most, if not all, of what we call the Old Testament. Not only that, and probably in a way that started completely sincerely, they were looking for Messiah. They were looking for God's final king. And they thought he could show up on the scene any day. So they'd arranged their whole life, their whole lifestyle to make sure that when Messiah, when the ultimate prophet, when the serpent crusher came from God, they would be so holy, they would be the first ones to recognize him. So they'd taken all of the laws of God and they'd created their own rules before the laws of God to make sure they couldn't even get close to breaking God's laws. So some of you that grew up in youth groups of a certain brand know exactly how this works. So we learned early on that the Bible says you should not have sex outside of marriage. But we discovered there are different schools of thought on that. Like, what's the actual line there? Is the actual line the line, or is there a line before the line when it comes to that? So we all wanted to know the answer to the same question. You know what the question was? How far is too far to go on a date? And so we would ask the question, and we'd start drawing lines. Did some of you experience this? You usually started the lines that we drew with wisdom. So you should establish some boundaries out loud with somebody that you're dating, and then not cross the boundaries that you've established. But that just raises a question. Where should the boundary be? Like third base, is that the boundary? Or second base, first base, batter's box? And then if you establish the boundary as first base, is it okay to lead off of first base as long as you don't steal second, you know? But then you realize, and maybe from experience, that boundary might not be even enough, because people find themselves then in a what's wrong with me moment. And then you back up the boundary just a little before that, and then you back it up even a little more before that, and you back it up even a little more before that, so that you can't cross the boundary that's the boundary before the boundary before the boundary before the boundary before the rule. To the point that some of you even grew up in traditions where it wasn't allowed for boys and girls to swim together in the same swimming pool, because who knows where that could lead. And you multiply all of that out beyond just that one law to all of the laws. It's not just sex outside of marriage, it's all 613 commands that God gave, and out of a sincere heart. Because even a little sin is a big sin in the eyes of a big God, yes? So that's where these Pharisees lived every single day of their lives. All in an attempt to avoid ever having a moment where they have to ask the question, what's wrong with me? But where they were constantly looking around at everybody else beside them, asking the question, what is wrong with you? And this is an example. They didn't want to eat unclean food. But it raises a question. When you don't want to eat unclean food, what if you buy clean food that somewhere in the supply chain got touched by people who were unclean, and the unclean from those people got on the clean food, and then you bought it at the store and took it home with you? What if one of those people handled the plate or the cup that you bought at Crate and Barrel and brought home, and then they put it back on the shelf? They decided not to buy it, and you bought it and took it home to your house. Like, you can't know. So how do you know that you're safe? In order to be safe, you should probably wash your food and your plates and your hands every time you leave the market. Or again, before you get ready to eat, to make sure that what's wrong with you isn't contagious to me, doesn't somehow jump on me so I end up in a what's wrong with me kind of situation right before the Messiah shows up. And you have to do it the right way to make sure that the washing takes. So they developed these elaborate ceremonies around the boundaries to make sure that they did the boundaries right. That's how these ceremonial washings developed. But here's the problem. Over time, and you know this if you've lived this, it gets really easy to make the boundary before the boundary before the boundary the main thing. To focus on the boundaries so much that you make the boundaries as heavy as the commands of God. And eventually, you convince yourself that because you've learned how to manage your behavior, your heart will stay healthy and pure. And here's why we want to take it easy on the Pharisees. Because Jesus is going to lead us to a moment where the people that are trying to follow him realize this is not just a what's wrong with them Pharisees thing. I do this too. We gauge the health of our heart by the presence of our external litmus tests, whatever they are. So somebody asks us the question, if you were to die tonight and stand before God, why should he let you into heaven? You know what the most common response to that question is? Well, I haven't ever murdered anybody. Some of us start with litmus tests like, well, I read my Bible like every day, even when I don't have to. Sometimes I pray, not just before meals. I always vote for the right party or the left party. I never hang out with those people. So surely he'd let me in. We judge the health of our heart by the criteria that we can control. Even if it's good and moral and wise and even Bible-recommended behaviors. It's not that any of those things are necessarily bad things. Boundaries can be wise. Habits can be healthy. The problem comes when the external thing becomes the thing that we trust in to know we're okay. We start building our little systems of righteousness. Like I read my Bible, I go to church, I'm conservative, I'm progressive, I don't drink. I homeschool my kids. I send my kids to public school so they can shine as lights. Not one of those angry Christians. I'm not one of those compromised Christians. And pretty quickly the conversation shifts from how do I walk with God to how do I reassure myself that I'm one of the good people? Or at least one of the better than most people. That's the danger, because eventually you can get so good at managing external behaviors that you mask all of the symptoms of something Jesus says is a terminal illness. In fact, look where he goes next, verse 6. He says to these really good people, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you, hypocrites. As it's written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And then he gives some examples. So look, the law was honor your father and mother. And then you came up with all kinds of systems and habits and acts of generosity to remind you to honor your father and mother. But then you got to the point that when your parents needed you, you said, these were the Pharisees, shoot, I can't help you because I just honored God with what I would have used to help you. And the external behaviors that you designed to try to cure you, to try to keep you pure, have actually made you sicker. And then Jesus looks out at the crowd, because this is not just a Pharisee thing. It's not just a disciples or a follower of Jesus thing, not even a religious thing. It's a thing. It's a people thing. It's a whole crowd thing. And he says this in verse 14. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him. And he said, listen to me, everyone. And understand this, nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it's what comes out of a person that defiles them. And some of you might not feel it when he says those words, but the crowd listening to Jesus that day, it was like the floor dropped out from underneath them. Because for centuries, they'd been told that the danger to them was all out there. It was around them. It was in the world. It was in the culture. It was in the food. It was in those people. What's wrong with them is the reason for what's wrong with me. And Jesus says, you've misdiagnosed the whole problem. The real issue isn't what gets on you. It's not what gets into you from outside of you. The real issue, Jesus says, is what's already on the inside of you. Which honestly is a more terrifying diagnosis, isn't it? Because if the problem's outside of me, I can keep it away from me, or I can stay away from it. Like I can control it. I can avoid it. I can manage it. I can protect myself from it. But if the problem is inside of me, what do I do with that? And notice, the disciples have that question. What do I do with that? In fact, they still don't get it. They pull him aside. Verse 17, they say, hey, Jesus, come with that again. Because this is not just hard for the crowd. It's not just hard for the Pharisees. This is a lesson that's hard for followers of Jesus. Verse 17, after he'd left the crowd and entered the house, the disciples asked him about this parable. Are you so dull? He asked. Don't you see? Nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them. For it doesn't go into their heart, but their stomach and then out of the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. Okay, which means what? Now, we've said this before. When you're walking through your office, you've got a cup of hot coffee, and you're bumped into, or you run into the wall. Why is it that coffee comes out of your cup and splatters all over you and the floor all around you? The reason that coffee comes out of the cup is because coffee was what was in the cup. It's the stuff that comes out of you is the stuff that defiles you. What does that mean about what's inside of you? Jesus says the corruption, the evil that we keep blaming on the outside out there, it has roots in our own heart too. Look what he says in verse 21. For it's from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. Which is a pretty okay list if you read it real fast, isn't it? I mean, murder, adultery, theft, yada, yada, yada. But if you just slow down when you read through the list, what do every single one of us realize? Something from our list is on that list. And again, this isn't a crowd thing. This isn't a Pharisee thing. It's not just a follower of Jesus thing. This is a human thing. Jesus says those things don't just occasionally visit the heart from the outside. Jesus says, look, the call is coming from inside the house. Clean hands can't fix a dirty heart. Clean hands can't fix a dirty heart, which means no amount of external behavior can make you clean. No amount of religious ritual and trying harder can solve the question that we started with at the top. The answer to the question, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? It's the same problem. It's something that exists inside of me, which means all the symptom management in the world not going to cure our disease. Because it misunderstands, it misdiagnoses where the problem actually comes from. And this is where self-help and resolutions and frankly, most religion, even some strains of religion that has Jesus' name attached to it, gets it totally wrong. The message is basically some version of God is good, you are bad, try harder. Add some new rules. Start a new ritual. Clean up your act. Control your impulses. Get it together. And then hold it together. And for a little while, that even seems to work if you've tried it. But I have a friend that calls it beach ball theology. Can you throw that up to me? Thanks. You ever tried to hold one of these things underwater at the ocean? I mean, you could do it for a little while, can't you? Especially if you've got some muscle, some of you CrossFit, F3 kind of people, you put your whole weight on it. You can hold it under the water, especially at the beach for a little while. If you try really hard, for a really long time, but at some point, eventually, even the strongest among us, we're ultimately going to give out. Or we're going to find that there's sunscreen on our arms that makes it slippery. Or a wave comes along that's bigger than us that we didn't anticipate, and it throws us off balance. And you know what happens when that happens? As hard as we've tried, as strong as we are, it doesn't just slowly rise to the surface in the moment, does it? The whole thing blows up in your face. And that's the strategy of religion. Some of you know exactly what that feels like spiritually. The last time was the last time, and you hold it under the water. This time I'll control my anger. You squeeze it under the water. Next time I'll stop looking at that. I'll be more patient this time. And this time I won't live for their approval. This time I'll trust God. And for a little while the whole thing works till it all comes flying up in our face again. That's how a lot of us experience religion. It's what we think it takes to get close to Jesus, what we think it takes to make God happy or to keep God happy with us. We've just got to take all of that stuff and hold it under the water. That's why self-help books will always be bestsellers. And the new releases always sell better than the old titles. Because we keep looking for new strategies to force something down that Jesus says is actually coming from our heart. So the problem isn't that the beach ball occasionally pops up. The problem is what it's filled with. What's wrong with me isn't that sexual immorality and theft and murder and adultery and greed and malice and deceit and lewdness and envy, slander and arrogance and folly occasionally show up around me. The problem is that's what I'm full of. So what do I do with what's wrong with me? Do you notice the crowd doesn't ask it? Pharisees don't ask it. But the disciples are discovering this is the whole reason Jesus came. Not just to give us better rules. Not just to tell bad people to behave or get tired people to try harder. Not just to slap our hands and condemn us every time the beach ball pops up again. Jesus came to do something and give something that religion and self-help and trying harder will never do. He came to make people clean from the inside out. And the only way that can happen is for Jesus to take all the uncleanness, all the corruption, all of the evil that we keep hiding and managing and blaming and pushing down on everybody else, and to put it to death on a cross. Jesus can take a cross-shaped dagger to the beach ball and empty it of all of its power over you. The clean one became unclean so that unclean people could be made new. Not just forgiven, transformed, changed. Not into people who never struggle again, but into people with brand new hearts, with the capacity for new desires and affections and power and new life, which means the invitation of Jesus over and over and over is not pretend better, try harder, manage yourself just a little more carefully. The invitation is bring me the real you, all of it. Bring me the angry you, the addicted you, the exhausted you, the jealous you, the pretending you, the religious you. And trust me. Because Jesus is not afraid of what's in your heart. He already knows. He's the only one who can take it away and transform what's wrong with you into a person who's been made brand new. Would you pray with me? I think some of you in this moment probably realize that your whole strategy for being right with God has been to force the beach ball down under the water. and you realize it's not working. There's better news for you today if you'll receive it. The clean one became unclean so that you could be made new and set free. Jesus lived the perfect life and died the death that you and I deserve for what's wrong with us, so that he could offer you life and a brand new heart, the chance to be forgiven and free and set free for a life that matters. But it won't happen by just suppressing it and repressing it and trying harder and going to church more. He's inviting you to trust him. And you can do it right where you sit. It's as simple as telling him in your own words some version of this: Jesus, I've tried trying for a long, long time. I've tried resolving. I've tried religion. But I haven't trusted you. And I believe that you came to make me new, that you took the penalty I deserved, paid the price that I needed to pay, and you offered me forgiveness and freedom and your presence with me. And I'm trusting you today. Lord, I assume that that's not just the prayer for some of us that are coming to you for the very first time. Because this is not just a message for the crowd, or there are some of us who have lived for a really long time as Pharisees in total sincerity, trying to make ourselves right before you so that we would recognize you, so that we could be holy before you, but we've made the wrong thing the main thing. And we want to return today to a place where we trust in you and you alone. Lord, would you allow all of us to see who you are and the life that you offer? Would you let us recognize you and accept your invitation to life that's truly life? We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.